What particular ambition we have is also to make sure that we promote more European students coming to Indonesia. It's not always so easy. Indonesia, of course, is a very large country. Just maybe one observation I've made, sometimes think that young people in Indonesia ought to be speaking a little bit better English than they sometimes do. I generalize, I'm very cautious expressing myself, but I think that is very much needed if your country to benefit from the global trading links that we are building up right now, including with the
Hi everyone, welcome to the special edition of Mengglobal Talks. I am Edwin Chandra.
And I am Maria Agnes from Indonesia Mengglobal.
We will be hosting today's discussion of the theme, The Perspective of the EU-Indonesia Relations, Education and Foreign Policy.
For those of you who are not familiar, Indonesia Mengglobal is a non-profit organization that aims to inform and inspire Indonesians to study and have a career abroad. Founded as a blog in March of 2012 and has instituted into a non-profit foundation in May 2017, it has the aim to ultimately empower Indonesians who aspire to pursue global education and career opportunities abroad. We hope that today's special edition of Mengglobal Talks will be able to achieve this.
To begin our Mengglobal Talks, today we have a very special guest, the European Union Ambassador to Indonesia and Brunei Darussalam, His Excellency Ambassador Vincent Piket. Previously, Ambassador Vincent Piket was posted as the head of division for Algeria, Libya, Morocco and Tunisia, Middle East and North Africa Department at the European External Action Service, Brussels in 2019. Ambassador Vincent obtained his Master of Arts degree at Redbourn University at Nijmegen, as well at the University of Hull, United Kingdom. After that, he returned to Redbourn University to pursue his doctorate degree of the art. Hello, Mr. Ambassador. Apa kabar?
Baik, terima kasih. Apa kabar Anda?
Baik. Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, for making time to talk with us. We believe that this will be a very interesting talk that has been also awaited by a lot of Indonesian youth.
I look forward.
Yeah. So without further ado, we will begin our talk show session for today. We will begin our talk show session with your experience here in Indonesia. So Ambassador Vincent, in the last 3 years of being Ambassador of the EU to Indonesia, what development do you see in the EU-Indonesia relations? What has changed since you first stepped into this role in comparison to now?
Well, very good question. When I stepped into this role in September 2019, nobody could have foreseen the COVID pandemic that hit us all globally in January 2020, and that evidently has colored, has determined what we have been able to do between Indonesia and the EU in our bilateral relations. And it's been a very, very impactful development, evidently. So that has tested our ability to deal with crises of this sort, has tested our resilience, as we say, and to the capability of provide support to one another at times of great need in many ways, of course. Vaccines is one thing. It took some while to get that on the road, but in the end we did that. In Europe, of course, but certainly also bilaterally. And also consular dimension was very, very prominent. We had at some point at the start of the crisis a good 22,000 Europeans in country at a time when the whole international flight system went down from one day to the next almost. So we had to repatriate those people from Indonesia to Europe, and Indonesia had to do something similar for the Indonesians in Europe. So that was a very, very intense period of crisis cooperation. that has stuck with us, that experience, a positive experience, not easy, but still positive. Also in the further pursuit of our cooperation, right up to the G20 summit of last month. So that is one thing I would say. Secondly, neither of us or nobody could have predicted the terrible war that started by Russia against Ukraine in February this year. That too has had a tremendous impact on what we discuss together, what we dialogue about, and what we need to address in the bilateral political relations. And it still goes on. As you know, the war continues to rage day in, day out with horrible shelling by Russia of civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. Ukrainians at risk of severe hardship during the winter, and the winters there are very, very cold. So that is something that we have to pursue. We have had good cooperation with Indonesia on this matter as well, also up to and including the summit of the G20 last month. But now we have to pursue, we have to persevere on that and try and push for a resolution. So that has been a momentous development. The last development, and we can come back to that later on in the discussion, was definitely the global climate crisis, which has continued to manifest itself in the shape of disasters and extreme weather phenomena, and besides also in the scientific evidence of the continuing rise of global temperatures. And and there's no two ways about it. We have to deal with that upfront in a multilateral framework, but also bilaterally by supporting one another in trying to cut down CO2 emissions and bring global warming to a standstill.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting, Ambassador Vincent, that you've mentioned a couple of things that we have already prepared to ask you regarding regarding the resilience of both the EU and Indonesia following the pandemic. We've also mentioned the G20 summit that was just previously conducted in Bali, and also the geopolitical war that we are facing now, that the world is facing. And in your statement, you conveyed that Indonesia and the EU must work together in addressing these issues. Do you think that Indonesia is a key partner in the EU for the EU regarding this, and how do you think Indonesia can collaborate with the EU moving forward?
Yes, certainly Indonesia is a key partner for us. In times of instability, of crisis, of course, you need friends. You need friends to deal with the problems and solve them together, and create stability where there is instability, etc. And we see Indonesia very much as a like-minded country, attached to the multilateral order, the UN Charter, and so on, with very comparable values in terms of democracy and human rights. It's not identical, but we look in the same way at things. Grosso modo, the UN meeting of the Human Rights Council last week showed that as well. So we believe a lot in our relationship. It's a strong one. It's quite an old one already. Indeed, we also recognize that we can and must continue further, strengthening it, expanding it, deepening it in all respects, in all areas where we have common interests, mutual interests, in a global or a regional or a bilateral contact. And that's our job. That's my job here as well, of course. Can Indonesia do more? Yes, it can. So can we. But so that's the task we have, to try and identify the areas where we, in a reasonable term, can make progress and create more benefits for our citizens. Diplomacy is partly the political process, but of course, the test of the matter is, what do you produce in terms of benefits, of results for your citizens? Whether it's trade or economic cooperation or investment or climate matters, sustainable development, all of these things are crucial for Indonesia, but likewise for us. So that is the task we have. We hope to, particularly in the coming year or so, so up to the end of 2023, to make very, very solid progress on our trade relations, with the aim to try and conclude the talks for the big Indonesia-EU free trade agreement, called the CEPA. So that is a very specific target that we have on our agenda.
It's very interesting. When we talk about Indonesia and also EU commitment, we also see an area that is very highly important, which is education. And we believe that education is actually a key issue that we at Indonesia Mengglobal has been trying to forge forward. So, aligned with our mission at Indonesia Mengglobal, we focus a lot in democratizing information regarding opportunities for Indonesians youth to pursue their education abroad. And we can tell that from the past decade, from the past 10 years, EU countries have been highly sought out by the Indonesian youth as one of their best destinations to study abroad. This demand has been readily supplied by many opportunities as well to pursue studies in Europe through the funding and programs provided by the EU, such as Erasmus+, Erasmus Mundus Joint Masters, and also the MSCA. My question to Ambassador Vincent is, does education still play a pivotal part in the EU-Indonesia partnership even up to this date?
First of all, congratulations to your organization, to Mengglobal, for having chosen education cooperation and linkages between Indonesia and foreign countries as your mission. Secondly, yes, education exchanges are very much part of our core bilateral relations with Indonesia. A couple of ways. First of all, exchange programs. You've mentioned the most important ones. The Erasmus program is, of course, the one that we are most proud of as Europeans. Every year, a good 120, 150 Indonesian students being granted scholarships for study in Europe for half a year, and sometimes for 2 years for master's degrees. So a fantastic program, and we're really pleased with the interest that we have from Indonesia. Secondly, very interesting development has been in the past 2 years the fact that the Indonesian government at a certain point came to us saying, we would like to match what you do under the Erasmus program with a program of scholarships from the side of the government. The Ministry of Higher Education and the Ministry of Finance are working together. And so that's what we have been doing, basically more than doubling the number of students that we exchange on a yearly basis with the aim of developing the human resources, the human capital of Indonesia as part of your economic development drive towards 2045. So fantastic cooperation, very practical, very hands-on, and with evident benefits for Indonesian students. Lastly, I would say we can still do more if in establishing institutional linkages. Exchanges, of course, often have on an individual basis, but vital is that you hook up the Department for Economics in Medan or wherever in Yogyakarta or in the Moluccas with counterparts in Europe and make institutional partnerships, but also with the exchange of professors and lecturers in both directions. So that's very important as well. So that's something we still can do more on. But I'm quite optimistic with the interest that we feel, and I think you say the same, that this is going to work. What particular ambition we have is also to make sure that we are promoting more European students coming to Indonesia.
Yeah.
And it's not always so easy. Indonesia, of course, is a very large country, but to many Europeans it is a bit far away, and not everybody has a personal linkage with it through family or friends who have visited, and so that is something we can work on, and we have some activities ourselves for doing that, doing outreach in Europe, and certainly programs like yours can be extremely helpful.
It's really great to hear that the collaboration has been even bigger now, and hopefully it can create even bigger impact for not only for the Indonesian youth to study abroad at the EU, but also the EU youth can also join and actually explore Indonesia for their education.
Definitely. But one thing I would like to add is that our experience in Europe, we've had this Erasmus program for higher education exchanges ever since roughly the very late 80s, 1980s, 88 or 1990. And ever since the start, it has given scholarships to European students for exchanges in other EU member states. 3 million students up to now. So it has become a tremendous feature of the way European students do university degrees in Europe, and I would think that very many will consider their study program incomplete if they haven't also spent at least a semester in a university in other European countries. And why is that important? Of course, first of all, for the learning benefit for the students of themselves. But secondly, also, it's about creating mutual information, knowledge, and understanding between countries within the European Union, and thereby consolidating the sense that we are a union of countries, and we belong together. We have a lot of things in common. We have some other different interests, of course, as well. But never mind that. We have a common mission in the world, and that's very important, I think, to mention. And I relate that also to the relations between Indonesia and the European Union.
Yeah.
That what we're after is, of course, boosting human capital, but also creating mutual understanding and greater knowledge, vice versa, so that we, that helps our bilateral relations forward, politically, economically, and otherwise.
Totally agree with you on that side.
I think, Ambassador Vincent, that's a great segue into my question regarding how scholarships to the EU, as previously mentioned, Erasmus as one of the most favored one in Indonesia currently, among many others. Not only does that give an opportunity for Indonesians to build relations with EU citizens and have communities over there, but definitely the point on building human resources. How can Indonesians learn from the EU, and hopefully in the future, EU learn from Indonesians for future programs and future exchanges to Indonesia. But regarding building human resources, one of the things that you stated before about sustainability and climate change, a really big policy on this in the EU is the EU Green Deal. It's one of the EU's priorities, and as we know, the education system is highly influenced by the demand of skills in the field and industries. My question is, how do you think the EU Green Deal will actually have an impact on the education system, specifically on the study programs that maybe Indonesians will study when they go to the EU? And how do you think Indonesian youths pursuing an EU education can rise to be experts in these fields through the EU opportunities?
Well, maybe first say that the EU is a global leader if it comes to green policies in greening our economy, cutting CO2 from our economy. We are the only region that has set carbon neutrality as early as the year 2050, 50. So that is very ambitious, very tough. It's not easy, but we will do it. We are determined to deliver. That is what the European citizens want. Opinion poll after opinion poll says that. Top priority to tackle that. So we're rolling out all these policies in energy, in transport, in construction, in the financial sector, etc., for making that possible. Being the first and the first mover sometimes means that we have to hard time explaining this to our partners abroad, and including Indonesia. But we will try to convince them, and that what we are doing is not only good for Europe but also good for the world, and is also fair towards others. Now, how does this affect higher education and higher education exchanges? It's evident that if you want to green your economy and your industry and in all respects and the transport sector and so on, you've got to educate the people who will be working in these areas, who know about electric technology and who know about solar panels and geothermal installations for housing and so on. So you have a tremendous educational job to do, to train people who are in the workforce already, but also to train the future generation. And we are lucky in the sense that because we have been working on the green policies for quite a while already, or good 3 decades, we have a good basis in terms of education, know-how and so forth. So that is to our advantage for the European continent, but also for exchanges with Indonesia. We prioritize certain topics for these exchanges, and the green sector, in the broader sense, is part of that for exchanges under the Erasmus program, and the same is true for the program of the Indonesian government. So we are prioritizing that area of work quite strongly already now, and we will continue to do that. Lastly, students are campaigners. It's true in Europe, and I know that also for here. Students, young generation in general, are the ones who will make sure that the old generation that was in power and so on stand on their feet and stand on their toes and make do the necessary thing for the future. And so there are also, I think, exchanges between students here and European students about the topic of climate activism is very, very good and very important. Just get together, mutually motivate one another about this cause, because it is sometimes difficult, of course, to keep on campaigning and progress is slow, etc. So that is something that we also very much value doing with organizations like yours and others here in Indonesia.
Oh, that's really nice to hear. We also see the reaffirmed dedication between EU and also Indonesia, including as well in Indo-Pacific region through the IEU's SIPA. So this policy aims to strengthen Indonesia in economic relations, trade, and also investment. In your opinion, how does education play a role in this?
First of all, you're right that as part of our Indo-Pacific strategy for boosting the relations between the EU and the countries here, top priority is the economy, is trade, is investment. At the end of the day, it's the trade that greases the wheels, that brings companies together, that promotes investment, creates jobs, and so on. And the negotiations that we're having right now for the trade agreement are aimed at that. We do it because the future trade agreement will bring benefits also to Indonesia. We have calculated, our economists have calculated it, very good benefits of extra GDP every year thanks to more exports for Indonesia, more export revenue, more jobs, etc. The other thing is how does this relate to education? Any agreement you sign with your counterpart, it falls or stands depending on whether you're able to implement it, whether you can use it, and you have the companies that know about it, and that you have the workers that know about the markets, and the managers that know about the markets in Europe, and whether your staff has the linguistic skills for communicating with foreign countries, foreign markets. So that is very important, and here again, the universities in Indonesia are crucial. The economic departments, but also for the business administration, for trade and so forth. The language departments as well, and I think that's maybe one observation I've made. Sometimes think that the young people in Indonesia in particular ought to be speaking a little bit better English than they sometimes do. I generalize, I'm very cautious expressing myself, but I think that is very much needed if you want your country to benefit from the global trading links that we are building up right now, including with Europe.
I see.
Ambassador Vincent, regarding what you stated before, how Indonesians might benefit more if they had more ability or could build their ability to communicate in English, and how that could actually build a bridge for them to gain more opportunities abroad and others in general. This actually relates to my next question regarding how the EU has a lot of study and research grant opportunities that are well known by many education enthusiasts across the globe, such as Erasmus+, Horizon Europe, and the Marie Sklodowska-Curie Action. However, the number of grantees from Indonesia have always been outnumbered by countries such as the Philippines, Bangladesh, India, and Brazil. I can't help but wonder, do you think that might be one of the reasons we are outnumbered? And knowing the potentials of, or knowing the the current potential of Indonesian students and researchers by number, are there specific strategies for the EU delegation for Indonesia to raise the number of Indonesian students and researchers to make use of these study and research collaborations opportunities?
Well, let me put it positively that we have seen quite an increase in the number of Indonesian students leaving for Europe for half a year, for a year, under the EU-funded programs and the government-funded programs. So we now stand at a good 2,000 students every year going out to Europe, and that is an increase by about 60% compared to where we stood a few years ago. So I think that's very positive, and I think it's partly the result of good communication and activities to publicize the opportunities, including through the higher education fair that we organize every year in-person format, but also digitally. Been quite successful. The second development or positive factor has been the fact that many more European universities have started to offer study programs at undergraduate and at postgraduate graduate level in English, whether they are in an English-speaking country or in other countries. But wherever you go, in Spain, Portugal, Greece, Bulgaria, Poland, the Baltic states, in the Scandinavian states, Nordic states, you will always find many universities with English language programs in all disciplines. And that's fantastic, because it has made the education sector of European countries so much more accessible. So you can study what you wish to study in English, and at the same time still have the opportunity to learn the language of the country where you are. So it's an educational experience and a cultural experience at the same time. And that's I think one of the very beautiful things of studying in Europe, that it's we have this integrated space, this union. You know, when you enter, yes, you have to apply for a visa in order to enter, but once you enter, then you have this whole space available for you. Passport-free travel between the large majority of member states, with the opportunities to spend a long weekend in the country next door, and get the feeling for the diversity that Europe has in the culture, in the architecture, the history, the art, and the languages. So I think that's a very attractive feature for Europe, and I do think that the Indonesian students are also attracted to that dimension.
I think having the opportunity to experience the environment and also the unique culture of the EU countries offer for Indonesians is definitely, I can tell, life-changing, because it opened up our horizons and also how we can even be a better person in the future. My next question is, knowing that European universities have attracted hundreds of IISMA awardees to spend at least one semester experiencing the study environment and also unique culture in the EU countries, do you think this might relate to the previous talk that we have had? The more EU students should experience studying and exploring Indonesian culture as well. Especially in Indonesia, we have a lot of culture in different islands. We have different culture and also experience to offer. And if yes, is there any EU program supporting this student mobility from the EU to Indonesia?
I very much agree that exchange programs work only if there is some level of reciprocity. Doesn't need to be perfect, of course, 50-50 or 100-100, but there has to be a mutual interest, and for that reason we very much believe in the promotion of studying in Indonesia for European Erasmus grant holders. I think it's very important for the educational exchange and for the mutual understanding between Indonesia and the European Union. And thirdly, it's of interest for educational interests, because, maybe in some areas European universities are more advanced or better equipped than an average university in Indonesia, but there are very specific centers of expertise in Indonesia from which we can benefit a lot. And the cultural side, the diversity of cultures in Indonesia is one, evidently. The language is evident, and thirdly, disciplines, academic disciplines related to the natural environment, to the forests, agriculture, tropical commodities, etc. We trade a lot in such commodities with Indonesia. We need to know more about them in order to make sure that trade stays sustainable, etc. So there we also have a tremendous immediate interest in sending over people here at the undergraduate, but certainly at the graduate level, to do research in the various sectors in the various parts of Indonesia. I forgot to mention the blue economy. You're an archipelago, Nusantara, and so there's a tremendous amount of things that we can learn from you, but also together in how to develop the blue economy and while keeping it sustainable.
Ambassador Vincent, it's very clear that from what you have said that there is a very beautiful point in EU and Indonesia relations is that we can learn from each other. And I think the point of learning from each other can happen through multilateralism in preserving the EU-Indonesia relations. Do you think that this is important in preserving these multilateral relations? And how do you think through the programs, through scholarships and such, these relations can be preserved going forward?
Multilateralism is not just important, it's crucial for preserving the world order and for creating a very solid and strong basis for bilateral relations between countries, between Indonesia and the European Union. We've seen that over recent months with the Russian war against Ukraine. We have observed how strongly Indonesians feel and the government feels about the multilateral order, the UN Charter, the inviolability of borders, of sovereign borders, respect for sovereignty. Those are very, very important features of the world order and the UN world order. And we believe in them, and so does Indonesia, so that creates this basis for going further. And now here, of course, education is vital. Reality is that there's an awful lot of disinformation around concerning wars in general, but particularly this present war. Disinformation of a very damaging sort, setting up countries against other countries and creating divisions within continents, the European continent. This is a campaign, massive campaign, waged by the Kremlin in order to create the best possible basis for their war against Ukraine. So in a situation like that, of course, you need people who know international law, know international diplomacy, who know how in the past conflicts have been resolved through diplomacy or multilateral action and so on. And that's something where the universities, where education has to contribute. Very important that young people discuss these matters, that they debate about these matters. And debate is vital in order to confront disinformation and to really get on the table what matters for the stability and safety and the prosperity of nations. And there we see that in Indonesia, that sense, the political sense is very strong, that you wish to preserve that. Just think about it. I always say that whenever I talk about the war in Ukraine, imagine that if it was your country that was being attacked in this way.
Yeah.
Imagine that and think that through. The human losses, the economic destruction, the refugees. That is very important to realize that and to relate that back to the world order that we have all signed up to in the UN Charter.
Well, in relations to preserving the global order, this comes to the last part of our talk. We cannot help but to discuss or talk about the G20 summit that has just been successfully conducted last month in Bali, with the theme of this year's forum, Recover Together, Recover Stronger. This year, actually, Indonesia Mengglobal also has just celebrated our 10th anniversary with the theme Boundless Possibilities Amid Bounded Times. So for Ambassador Vincent, what do you think of these phrases? Are they good? Are they actually a good representation for what EU and Indonesia have been striving for the past decade, for example? And how do you envision Recover Together, Recover Stronger, specifically for the perspective of education and also EU-Indonesia?
Indonesia did a fantastic job on the G20. Probably it was the biggest, the most difficult G20 presidency ever. And especially taking that into account, you can only congratulate Indonesia and Indonesians with the end result. Secondly, congratulations to Mengglobal
Thank you so much.
for your anniversary. Your possibilities are indeed boundless, but need to be framed and need to be rendered into action, in practical for young people. So here, your organization and others have a very, very good job to do, important job to bring information to your target audience about the possibilities. We can help you there with information from our side about the EU countries and our scholarship programs. So that the boundless possibilities turn into something concrete and practical, and within a bounded time, because as you say, as you suggest, time is not infinite, and we young people need to get their degrees and and get ready for the labor market. There's a big demand in crucial sectors for the development of your economy. So, and that's where your organization and with our support can certainly make a contribution to helping your growth, your sustainable growth, take shape in the coming decade.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Vincent, for the appreciation and also encouraging message for us, and also for the appreciation for the G20 summit that Indonesia has successfully held. It actually also because of the collaboration of multiple stakeholders, including the support of the EU. So we would really want to appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you.
We thank you, Ambassador Vincent, for this opportunity, and we hope that our discussion may not only be informational, but it gives a sense of hope for aspiring students to also study in the EU, but furthermore understand the importance of education, of pursuing education abroad, and how important the role that they play is in flourishing this partnership in the future. With that, we conclude this special edition of Mengglobal Talks, the perspective on the EU-Indonesia relations, education, and foreign policy.
Tune in to our website www.indonesiamengglobal.com, or our Instagram Indonesia Mengglobal, and YouTube, as well as our current and upcoming programs, including the information regarding education to the EU. You can also visit the official EU in Indonesia Instagram account at uni_Eropa for more information. Once again, Ambassador Vincent, thank you so much for your time.
Terima kasih banyak.
Terima kasih.
Sama-sama.